Yo, what is good, everybody? It's your boy Golden Falls, Golden What If, whatever you want to call me, and I'm back with part 2 of What If Deku was a Quirkless Prodigy. I just realized I should have called it What If Deku was born a Quirkless Prodigy, but hey, we're here now, and I'm not going to change it. I feel like that doesn't really matter that much. But at the end of the day, it seems like y'all enjoyed part 1 a good amount. It's, I believe, my fastest growing video right now, or maybe my second fastest growing video out of my last, good bit. Appreciate that. I thought it was a pretty good idea. I thought this was probably my best thumbnail I've ever made. I think this is a nice thumbnail. I like this style, and we'll probably be sticking with it for a little bit. Nonetheless, I'm not going to waste much more of your time, and we're going to get into part 2 of this What If. Let's get it. Izuku Midoriya has finished the UA entrance exam. He feels extremely confident about what he's just done, and he begins to just head out. Immediately, he's stormed by multiple people that were either watching. One including Aizawa, who's walking behind the pack, but Nejire, Mirio, and a couple other students that are in the third year are also going to ask him questions. They question him like crazy, asking about the whole quirk. He was quirkless, he was this. And Izuku kind of waves his hand, saying that he was quirkless. It seems like all the hard work he did actually reactivated a quirk that was dormant within him. He's not sure how it works. He's still even learning how his quirk works. So that whole little display of that weird black rope, that was something he had no idea even existed within his quirk. From a little bit away, All Might is watching, and luckily he doesn't feel too fearful about Izuku basically saying the truth, because Izuku is pretty fast on the fly. He's extremely smart, so it wouldn't take him too much to just come up with a random idea that is totally untrue, but would get him away with it. Nejire, Mirio are extremely impressed, and obviously they know how strong Izuku could have been with a quirk, so what happens now that he has one? He seems extremely powerful nonetheless, so it's really just flat out impressive. Of course, Bakugo comes storming by, saying that there's no way Izuku beat him, but the others from class basically the third years, or the big three, begin to say that they wouldn't be so sure about that if they were him. Izuku kind of shrugs it off and says that he'll be seeing them, well, pretty soon, because he's sure that he got in. Nejire agrees, and so does Mirio, saying that they'll probably be working together quicker than he possibly could imagine. Of course, Izuku would head off, and All Might would actually meet him. All Might questioning some things that actually occurred, especially with the use of whatever that quirk was. Izuku has no idea what happened, but All Might says he'll do some research into the past users of One For All. Maybe there's a reason why that quirk awakened. Maybe there's a reason or somehow that Izuku forced the activation. Izuku has no idea. He doesn't know, but luckily he was able to make that activation because he was able to save that girl. Nonetheless, after basically having that nice day and having a good time basically celebrating with his mother, especially with how successful he was in the entrance exam, he goes to sleep that night. During that sleep though, he would wake up in a cloud of mist, something covering his face and his mouth, so he couldn't even speak. Someone, other known as a former user of One For All, actually introduces himself, saying that he was the one that granted him this power. It seems that Izuku is far ready to actually gain some of his powers, and that these quirks will slowly but surely start tumbling into his possession. This quirk he's using or used is known as Black Whip, in which Izuku is just listening in complete awe at the idea that he has this power. There's so much he can do with it. Like, what can't he do? He basically can sling around like some spider person? Spider-Man? Spider-Boy. Sure. Izuku is just interested, listening as much as possible, but eventually that user of One For All would deteriorate and disappear as if it was just a dream. In a way it was, but at the same time it was a vestige of One For All speaking with Izuku. He would wake up the next morning and the windows around him would be shattered, or at least cracked, almost completely broken, and Izuku would look around. He'd go outside and tell his mother that something occurred last night, in which she thinks that he's talking about something else, and he says no, it's literally the window shattered because of some reaction to, his quirk that got basically shown up out of nowhere. And she's confused, but then sees these Shatter's windows and says that it's fine for him not to worry about it. Just to continue his training, continue working hard, and she's sure that everything will fall into place for him. And maybe one day he'll pay her back for the windows. Izuku laughs at this for a little bit. And of course, he would continue on working hard and getting his training up. He would still go to his classes and basically learn how to basically learn new techniques for jujitsu and karate and everything you could possibly think of. But less and less people would want to go against him, especially because without a quirk, he was kind of destroying everybody. Now with a quirk, I mean, that's kind of scary. If he activates it on accident, he might hurt someone pretty bad. Izuku knows how to not use it, so it's really nothing to worry about, but of course everybody's kind of chicken to even step into the ring with him, you could say. Nonetheless, a couple weeks would pass and finally the letter from UA would eventually arrive. When Izuku opens the letter, he sees a very, very familiar face. It is All Might himself, telling Izuku that he definitely did a great job and that he's going to be number 1 out of everybody in the entrance exam, and that he's welcome and he's going to join Class 1A. Izuku is extremely excited to hear this, and extremely excited to hear that school is only going to start up very, very soon. Izuku being excited, he just runs out and shows his mother, and basically this is the next step for him to become that number 1 hero that he wished to be since he was a little kid. After some time would pass, they'd finally arrive for the first day at UA. UA would be pretty simple. Izuku would enter Class 1A and immediately see Bakugo arguing with Tenya Ida, and this was just something Bakugo just did from time to time. Izuku would just walk by, and Bakugo would get mad as he walks over and basically tells him that don't think that getting number 1 now is gonna basically carry him all the way through. Izuku laughs and says, "Who says he got number 1? I swore you got number 1, Kachan. I mean, I'm pretty sure I got number 3. I mean, that's what my letter said." Of course, Izuku is lying in this regard. He's just laughing about it. And Bakugo, hearing this, gets really mad, thinking that somebody else got number 1. But at least he got higher than Izuku, basically making fun of him, saying that he knew that he would have gotten number 2. Just as these little bickerings happen, a bunch of other people begin to flood in. Izuku just ignores Bakugo as he continues to tirade, but he just sits down and waits. Eventually, more and more people would stumble in, including the person that Izuku saved, which her name is Ochaku Uraka, basically saying that she really didn't have much time to thank him anymore, and thanks him a ton. Izuku says it's fine, and says that anybody that would have the power to help someone like that would have used it. Unfortunately, many others just, I guess, didn't have that strength to do so. But he basically doesn't mean to sound like a jerk, but at the same time, it is true to a certain extent. We've seen it in real life, and we've also seen it in the exam. There's times that heroes don't have the strength to do it, so they just don't. Of course, this would be a little bit different in the entrance exam. The entrance exam, I'm sure they just didn't care, and they were just leaving, and they just wanted to make sure that their scores weren't hurt by trying to help somebody out. Of course, this would all end, or the whole conversation would end relatively quick when Aizawa would walk in, telling everybody to sit down and shut up. Aizawa would introduce himself as obviously Aizawa or Sensei or whatever you want to call him, and he begins to explain some things. "Listen, all of you are heroes in training, but I think you all need to be tested. I don't care about no entrance exam. I don't care that they so quote-unquote tested you. I'm going to be testing you. And if you're thinking about that whole, what about the orientation? No orientation. You guys have already heard all your life how great you are. I'm not here to tell you how great you are. Go meet me outside. It's time for a test." Izuku is kind of happy about this. I mean, he's been working hard all his life, and he's not against the idea of just skipping out on something like orientation and going and immediately taking some sort of physical exam that would basically show who's the best or who's the strongest in the class. He finds it quite funny because he never himself was praised like crazy until he showed great results. Izuku was quirkless basically his entire life, so all the way up until he was really good at martial arts, he wasn't getting any praise, and that would be just kind of how he is. He thinks praise is something unique. He doesn't take praise as one of those things that is a common courtesy, something that just always happens. Nonetheless, their little test would eventually begin when all of them are out there waiting. Aizawa would call out Izuku, saying that since he got first in the entrance exam, he will be throwing this ball first as far as possible. Bakugo gets really mad, thinking that Izuku lied to him, and Izuku just laughs, saying that and just shrugs his shoulders, saying that who else did you think would have gotten first? Immediately, Izuku grabs the ball and begins to focus. Using one for all at about 40 or to 45%, Izuku then wraps Black Whip around the ball as well, launching the ball as hard as possible with Black Whip attached, giving it that extra sling to it, like this giant slingshot you could call it. It just gets slung, or it just gets swung and thrown like crazy. Izuku launching it, and it goes about 1,500 meters. Izuku pretty happy with the score, and not a scratch on him, not hurt, no nothing. He's happy with the results. Izuku would then walk back, and basically everyone is in complete shock. He was able to use, well, whatever quirk or whatever power he used or showed in the entrance exam, combined with his physical strength, to actually sling the ball further than anybody possibly expected. Of course, Bakugo would go next, but he would be about 600 meters shy of Izuku, and this would just piss him off even more at the idea that he's still behind this quirkless loser. This loser that just got his quirk, supposedly? This is ridiculous. Of course, Izuku is just watching and doesn't really mind, and everybody around him begins to say how fun this is going to be, how cool it's going to be, and Izuku looks at them and then looks at Aizawa, and just by the vibe he gets from Aizawa, he knows what's coming next. Aizawa immediately cuts them off. Fun, huh? Really? That's what you think? Fine. Let's raise the stakes. If, and when I mean, when this is all over, whoever is in last place is getting expelled. Good luck going to another school. It's not my problem. Aizawa basically turns back around and tells them to whoever's next to come up. Everybody is in complete shock except for really Izuku and a couple other people that don't really care. Obviously someone like Momo Yaoyorozu knows that this is quote-unquote a hoax, but in terms of, well, Izuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, they don't really care because they're not getting last place. It's not even going to be close. Of course, all of these would continue on. Every little event that they have would just continue on and would finish up with relative ease. After being completely done with the events, the last place is actually Invisible Girl, or Hagakure, and Aizawa does expel her and does basically get rid of her. But this wouldn't last very long. It's just a front that he wants to put on to show everybody else that he is dead serious, but after about a day, she would be back into the class. I mean, he's allowed to expel and reinstate whenever he wants, so he just wanted to make sure that his point would come across that he is dead serious and has the power to basically expel the entire class if he just wanted to. Of course, that next day and the days following, they would do minor stuff, normal school things, of course, math, science, whatever you can really think of, and eventually it would lead to them having their first real bit of hero training. And that first real bit of hero training would come from All Might himself. He'd come charging through the door, like basically someone on crack, and would say, "I am here." All Might would walk into the door like a normal person, he remarks, and says that they'll be actually starting their hero or their first hero training. He tells everybody to get on their hero costumes, in which when Izuku checks out his own, it's actually a lot more high-techy than obviously the one he got from his mother. This time around, he would have the specs gone to the support course, and he would have something extremely similar, if not basically the same, as the one he would have later on in the seasons. Of course, he wouldn't want something very dingy and basically would break on impact for no apparent reason. Izuku would head over, get his hero suit, put it on, and it would emulate All Might a little bit, but of course would have his own little distinctions. Certain things that would allow him basically not to get grabbed, so it's more like skin tight in a way, but doesn't form fit too much where he can't move. He still wants to use his martial arts to an extent, but if he goes to the ground with somebody, he doesn't want baggy clothing that they can grab onto and hold him there. He wants to be able to slip and slide out of any scenario whenever he wants. That's kind of just that martial artist in his mind talking, right? Normally you would just have shorts, or like these like shorter shorts and no shirt in some events, and obviously that wouldn't be occur. Maybe in certain aspects you would have a big like kimono, but other than that, I mean, he's not gonna rock around with a huge kimono on. So he would arrive with the rest of his class with their hero suits on, and he'd wait for the advice of All Might. And All Might would begin to explain that this is what's going to happen. Heroes versus villains. It's something simple and something that's going on, well, forever. He begins to explain that there will be 2 heroes, 2 villains. The goal for the heroes is to go seize the bomb or capture both villains and then seize the bomb. For the villains, the goal is to either capture the heroes or basically draw out enough so that the timer runs out before they can actually touch the bomb. Obviously, the villains do have a good amount of advantage, but that's how real life is. Villains will have the advantage. You don't know what the villains will do, and that's the point of a hero. You have so much more to basically gather information and try to know compared to everybody else. And immediately after that, everybody would then be assigned their groups. Izuku would be told that he is with Ochako Uraraka and they are the heroes. And on the other side is Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida as the villains. The villains would head out to the building and basically Ida would start playing his quote-unquote role. Of course, Ochako would ask Izuku what he thinks about basically what they should do. What's the plan, all that. Izuku says that knowing Bakugo, he'll probably come screaming down that staircase and try to attack them. He'll immediately capture Bakugo. That should be the first job. And then getting rid of Ida should be easy enough. It's close quarters and he knows that Ida has a speed-like or engine-like quirk, and dashing around in the small quarters with quirks like theirs won't be very easy. And Ochako's pretty shocked. Not only in raw strength, Izuku is extremely powerful, but he has a mind for all of this. He thought out everything in a matter of seconds, and he knows how to analyze everybody's quirks. I mean, that isn't even just because he's a prodigy. Regular Izuku was very good at that. He was extremely good at figuring things out and knowing how to study and utilize other people's quirks against them, at least to a certain extent. Of course, we don't see that as much in canon anymore, but still, it was something that was part of Izuku's toolkit. About 5 minutes would pass, and that would be the planning phase of the heroes, and they would be allowed to enter. Izuku would tell Ochako to go basically in the other direction, and he'll meet her upstairs, that he'll handle Bakugo. But, of course, Bakugo, just like he thought, would come screaming down the staircase, charging right at Izuku. That one blast forward would be his last blast he would take. Izuku slipping right under it, slamming him on the ground, and immediately pinning his arm underneath Bakugo. He punches Bakugo straight in the jaw, knocking him out almost instantaneously. He just charged straight at somebody that has flawless martial arts. That's idiotic. He knows how fast Izuku is and know how strong he is now, but of course Bakugo's rage and overestimation of himself would allow him to falter. Of course, in this version, Bakugo may have tried harder and trained a little bit more, but he still has not been taught the lesson that Izuku would teach him now. Immediately capturing Bakugo after being knocked out, it's over the intercom, and Tenya Ida hears it that Bakugo has already been captured by the heroes, which is insane how fast that just occurred. Izuku then dashes up the staircase, meeting with Ochako, and eventually approaching the room where the bomb it currently is. Tenya Ida may have cleared out everything in that said room, but let's be honest, it doesn't really matter. Izuku then grabs Ida with Black Whip and holds him there still. Ida tries to move with his engine quirk, but Izuku would basically wrap Black Whip around the engines on his legs, covering them up and not allowing him to move, allowing them to capture Ida with relative ease. Of course, they would all head back to basically All Might, and All Might would explain what they did good, what they did wrong, but to be honest with you, Momo would do most of that. Momo would just explain how it seemed like Izuku basically had everything figured out before it even started. The match was practically over before it started. Bakugo being kind of mad about this. I mean, he goes over to be checked out by Recovery Girl, but there's no crazy basically damage to him. He was just knocked out relatively quickly, and it was over before it started, like she said. And of course, all the other matches would go on as usual, and everything would go relatively similar. And then, obviously, you would lead to a couple more days, and finally, the future heroes would go into their first bit of rescue training. Aizawa would begin to explain to them. Okay, there's buses outside. They're waiting for you. When we get on the bus, you can kind of do whatever you want. Just don't be too loud. I'm tired. But also, we're going to the USJ. The USJ is a rescue facility, and we'll have another pro hero there as well, and she'll be helping you. Okay, everyone leave. They would all head out to the buses, and during this bus ride, everybody would be debating on who's the strongest. Most going back to either Todoroki or Izuku. Bakugo not even being in the conversation, he got destroyed. Some people would argue that Izuku's basically technique and mind for all of this and being able to approach every scenario relatively easily makes him stronger than Todoroki. Todoroki might have some crazy ice powers, but who says Izuku can't just blast through that easily or even have a plan to just defeat him? Of course, there would be some arguments back and forth, but Izuku would have no opinion on it. He doesn't really care. Frankly, he believes that everybody has their strengths, everybody has their weaknesses, even including himself. He has weaknesses. It's not like he'll bring them up and tell everybody, but of course, everyone does. That's just basically how all of this works. Eventually, it would lead to them finally arriving at the USJ, and the one and only Pro Hero 13 would be there to greet them. Pro Hero 13 would bring them all in, telling them that that this is the plan. The plan is basically there's going to be multiple training or rescue facilities. They have mountains, collapsed buildings, basically a broken down ship. Anything you can really think of, that's what's going to happen. Just as she's saying this though, Izuku gets a massive headache. A headache that is splintering. He doesn't understand how, and he kind of slightly takes a knee and then shakes his head extremely hard. Izuku would struggle back to his feet, and Aizawa would ask what's going on, and Izuku says he doesn't know. As he says this though, Kirishima would ask if there's fake villains as well, pointing toward the middle of the USJ, and well, there they were. A ton of villains rising out of nowhere. Izuku realizes where this headache came from. It must be something to do with maybe One for All, maybe a different quirk, maybe just a reactive thing, an instinct thing. He doesn't know. Not 100%, but he can come to the conclusion later. That doesn't matter. Because just as all of these villains show up, his headache would go away. As if now that he sees the danger, there is no reason to sense it. Izuku stares over, and Aizawa tells the Pro Hero 13 to protect the kids. He jumps into action, and Izuku watches as Aizawa begins to handle villain after villain. Izuku questions if he can really handle all of that himself, but of course, Pro Hero 13 would say that he'd be just fine. He is a pro hero for a reason. Izuku would take her word for it, but would still be kind of uneasy about it. He's not sure, but out of nowhere, Danger Sense would go off once again, getting his headache, but nowhere near as bad this time. It seems like the warp portal, or Kurogiri, shows up right next to them. Izuku grabs a ton of them and is able to basically get them out of the way, but some of them are also basically in a position where right in front of Kurogiri. Immediately though, Pro Hero 13 tells them all to move out of the way as she's about to use her quirk, and Bakugo and also Kirishima instead don't listen and are about to jump and fight Kurogiri. Izuku, using Black Whip, pulls them both toward him as Pro Hero 13 smiles and begins to activate her quirk. Of course, this would almost defeat Kurogiri, but it would eventually backfire as she's extremely injured because of it. Izuku begins to look around and tries to get everybody out of there, but of course it's not that simple. Getting trapped within multiple portals and he'd be sent off in the middle of this ocean, maybe a lake. Izuku looks up to see this ship and he uses Black Whip to get up immediately. He stands above and sees that Asui and Mineta are already there. He asks if there's any plan to get out, and basically they were about to ask the same thing. Izuku begins to look at the ceiling. Maybe there's a way for him to swing across, but it's extremely high. He's not sure if Black Whip will even reach that far. There's some other things that he has an idea, but frankly there's no 100% guarantee. Just as he's saying this though, there are a ton of monsters beneath them. Izuku shakes his head and says that he could just go defeat them, that they could go defeat them themselves, or they could just basically blast over them. Izuku begins to ask how far Asui can actually jump, and she says pretty far. Frankly, she can leap off, at least if with Mineta in her arms, but it might need an extra boost once she begins to carry Izuku as well. Izuku says that's fine, that he can actually take the load off a little bit once they get closer to land, because he should be able to attach to something else and swing them over. Izuku says to basically follow his lead, and Mineta is basically crying. He's asking how he can be so cool under pressure. Izuku just shrugs, saying that this is the job of a hero, and if basically this is what you wanted, it's a pressure situation all the time. Izuku basically takes a swanton into the water, but doesn't. Right before he lands within it, he punches as hard as possible, creating a shockwave, making the air pressure go crazy, and he punches basically a hole in the water. He launches back up because of it, Asui grabbing him, and immediately he tells Mineta to start throwing his sticky balls. Him doing this allows them to basically just capture a bunch of the villains and just allow them to get away. That's about it. As Izuku knows that they could have probably defeated them, but this was the best way to go about it. As they get to the land, he wants to check up on his Aizawa. As he does this, it seems like he's doing just fine. Luckily, Aizawa, he's pretty proficient in his fighting, and he's okay. As Izuku's basically is about to say that they should head out, he begins to sense something else. Something has just entered the battlefield. Something that Aizawa himself cannot handle. He tells Asui and Mineta to get out of there right now, that he can basically help out Aizawa the best he possibly can. Asui thinks this is a bad idea, but Izuku refuses to basically listen, telling them to go. He sees this creature, other known as a Nomu. This big hulking creature seems to be charging at Aizawa, but just as it's charging at Aizawa, Izuku dashes in and kicks it square in the face, sending it off to the side. Luckily, he was able to just imbalance the creature a little bit so he can push it over. But Izuku can tell quickly that his punches, kicks won't be doing damage. It seems like they have some sort of shock absorption. Maybe, he's not sure. Immediately, Shigaraki begins to mock this green-haired kid. You think you can keep up with my Nomu? This thing is built to kill All Might. He'll kill a kid like you in seconds. Aizawa tells Izuku to get out of here, but Izuku shakes his head and begins to ramp up One for All immediately, ramping it up to about 55%. Izuku being able to control it, but he does have a little bit of strain on his body. He basically charges back at the Nomu, kicking into it, and now he's doing some sort of basically impact. Yes, of course, Izuku is just using his agility to bob and weave, and he's not making any sustainable marks, but it is basically slowing down the Nomu. Izuku's goal is to just either get everybody out of there or wait for All Might himself to come. And that's basically the goal. He eventually will get the Nomu off balance, sweeping his leg with Black Whip and trying to keep the Nomu on the ground. That's his goal. If he can keep him there, not let himself get grabbed, he should be fine. Izuku continues to do this, but just as he thinks that he's doing this flawlessly, the villains never play fair and it's never a one-on-one. The hand of Shigaraki comes through a portal and is right next to Izuku's face, but as he grabs his face, nothing happens. Well, Aizawa is still on his feet and is the furthest thing from hurt. He never was basically injured massively by the Nomu, and he activated his quirk. Shigaraki begins to laugh, saying how cool Aizawa is, but just as he says this, Izuku grabs the arm of Shigaraki and pulls him in, forcing him through the portal, and of course, Kurogiri can't close the portal. He'll kill Shigaraki. He pulls him through the portal, and Izuku basically breaks one of his arms, throwing him to the side immediately as the Nomu punches Izuku square in the face as he gets sent backwards. Izuku wasn't even able to react quick enough using Danger Sense. I mean, he was basically going through the motions of something else before that. Izuku grabs part of the ceiling and swings above the Nomu, sending shockwaves back down toward the Nomu as Shigaraki's sitting there screaming in pain. Kurogiri takes it upon himself to immediately get Shigaraki out of there, transporting him away. But Shigaraki complains, saying that he can still kill All Might. If All Might arrives, he only needs one touch, and that it will be the end of the symbol of peace. But Kurogiri says that that's what basically the Nomu is there for. That as long as he's there, or if he's there commanding the Nomu, he'll be okay. So using Kurogiri's warp portals, that's kind of what they do. They begin to basically have Shigaraki's voice emulated through it. But that's about it. Shigaraki's been injured. But the Nomu seems to not be flinching at Izuku at this moment. Izuku's getting tired out, but just as he feels that he might not be able to stall long enough, the doors slam open, and guess who it is? It's All Might. The one that gave him One for All, the person, All Might himself, has finally arrived. Charging in at the Nomu, landing a clean blow, All Might tells Izuku that he'll take it from here. But Izuku disagrees, saying that he should be able to keep up. I mean, frankly, it seems like the old man is getting slower in his age. Izuku smiles toward him as he laughs a bit, and All Might says that, well, we'll see what he has. And of course, with a 55 or about 55% One for All Izuku and All Might himself being in this scenario, and obviously at the USJ, the Nomu would be defeated relatively quickly. All Might would do a ton of the heavy lifting, but the Nomu would be extinguished, and All Might wouldn't even be forced out of his giant form to be covered up. Luckily, he's still able to hang on to it and was able to leave before anybody could even see. But the other villains, unluckily enough, would escape. Of course, getting a couple bullet wounds, but other than that, they would head off, and now they just have some stasis Nomu that isn't moving at all. Izuku would want some answers. What the hell was that? Why would they want to go and kill All Might like that anyways? Who was that exactly? All Might not sure. They don't really know, but they can guess that this is who they know as the League of Villains. A villain group that will basically take on the mass majority of their time as heroes. The League of Villains is nothing to basically blink your eyes at. But as a student, Izuku shouldn't have to worry about this. All Might makes this clear and says that it's time for him to show everybody who he truly is. And this next upcoming thing is exactly how he'll do it. The UA Sports Festival. As long as he can win the UA Sports Festival, well, let's just say he should have every single person calling, every single agency not questioning one bit at him being quirkless at one point. Every agency will want him there as an internship, will want him there so that they can get even more notoriety from basically someone that went from quirkless, this Quirkless Prodigy that had his quirk be awakened, and now he's on the track to being the best hero alive. All Might makes this clear, and Izuku says he won't let him down and he won't let himself down. He promises that. All Might smiles and says that he had a good pick, and Aizawa definitely made a good choice too. But what will happen in the UA Sports Festival? what will happen in the future internship that Izuku takes place in? Well, you'll have to find out in part 3 of What If Deku was a Quirkless Prodigy. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and a comment down below, all that good stuff. I hope y'all been enjoying, and it seems like you have been nonetheless. Make sure to check the links in the description. And yeah, that's about it. Hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.